The wedding photos were carefully arranged on the side table, 45 years of memories documented in fading images. But when Ellen asked Margaret Martinez about the most important person in her life, she stared blankly and said the words that broke her husband's heart daily. "I don't remember." Margaret Martinez, 65, had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's 3 years ago. The disease had progressed rapidly, stealing her memories piece by piece, until the woman who'd once recited poetry to her husband now looked at him like a stranger every morning. The Ellen DeGeneres Show had invited Margaret as part of their Love Stories week. Not knowing the full extent of her condition, her daughter had written to the show, describing her mother as a romantic who'd serenaded her father for decades, hoping Ellen might help them create one last beautiful memory together. Robert Martinez, 67, sat in the studio audience, wearing the blue tie Margaret had always said made his eyes sparkle. He watched his wife of 45 years prepare for her interview, knowing she had no idea who he was anymore. Ellen had been briefed about Margaret's condition, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality. During the pre-interview, Margaret had been polite but distant, treating Ellen like any stranger she might meet on the street. "Are you excited to be here today, Margaret?" Ellen had asked gently. "I suppose so," Margaret had replied with the careful politeness of someone trying to navigate a world that no longer made sense to her. "Though I'm not sure why I'm here." Ellen's heart had broken a little more with each exchange. This wasn't the romantic love story she'd expected to celebrate. This was something much more profound and devastating. The show began with its usual energy, but Ellen seemed more subdued than normal. She introduced Margaret with extra care, knowing the audience was about to witness something that would challenge their understanding of love and loss. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ellen announced, "please welcome Margaret Martinez, a woman who's spent her life believing in the power of love." Margaret walked onto the stage slowly, her movements careful and deliberate. She looked around the studio with the confusion of someone trying to process too much stimulation at once. Ellen guided her to the interview chair with gentle patience. "Margaret, thank you for being here today." "Thank you for having me," Margaret replied with automatic politeness. "Though I have to admit, I'm not entirely sure what we're supposed to talk about." Ellen's smile was tender. "We wanted to talk about love, about the most important relationships in your life." Margaret considered this for a moment. "Love is important," she said slowly. "I believe I used to know something about that." "Tell me, Margaret, who is the most important person in your life?" The question hung in the air. Margaret's brow furrowed as she searched through the fog of her deteriorating memory. In the audience, Robert gripped his daughter's hand, tears already forming in his eyes. "I don't remember," Margaret said finally, her voice carrying a sadness that filled the entire studio. Ellen felt her chest tighten. "You don't remember anyone special? Anyone who loves you?" "People tell me there are people who love me," Margaret said, "but I can't remember their faces. I can't remember their names. It's like trying to hold water in my hands." The studio was completely silent. Ellen had interviewed thousands of people, but she'd never felt more helpless than in this moment. "Margaret," Ellen said gently, "there's someone here today who knows you very well. Someone who's loved you for a very long time." Margaret looked around the studio with polite interest. "That's nice. I hope I haven't forgotten anything important about them." Ellen gestured toward the audience. "Margaret, I'd like you to meet Robert." Robert stood up slowly from his seat in the third row. He was a distinguished man who carried himself with the dignity of someone who'd learned to love without expectation of recognition. Margaret looked at him with the same polite attention she'd give any stranger. "Hello, Robert, it's nice to meet you." The words hit Robert like a physical blow. After 45 years of marriage, his wife was meeting him for the first time again. "Hello, Margaret," Robert said, his voice steady despite the tears streaming down his face. Ellen watched this exchange with growing understanding of the tragedy unfolding before her. "Margaret, Robert has something he'd like to tell you." Robert walked down to the stage, each step carrying the weight of decades of shared memories that only he now held. "Margaret, we've known each other for a very long time." "Have we?" Margaret asked with genuine curiosity. I'm sorry, but I don't remember you, though you seem very kind. Robert sat in the chair Ellen had brought for him, positioning himself so he could look directly into his wife's eyes. We met when we were 22 years old. You were singing outside the library at UCLA. Margaret listened with the polite attention of someone hearing a stranger's story. That sounds nice. I used to sing, I think. You sang La Vida es un Carnaval by Celia Cruz, Robert continued. It was my favorite song. I stopped to listen, and you asked me to dance right there on the sidewalk. Something flickered across Margaret's face, too brief to be recognition but perhaps the shadow of a memory. Dancing is nice, she said. Ellen realized she was witnessing something extraordinary. Not a reunion, but something much more complex. A man choosing to love someone who couldn't love him back in any way she could remember. Tell her about your wedding, Ellen said softly. Robert's voice grew stronger. We were married on June 15, 1978. I wore my father's suit, and you wore your grandmother's dress. You serenaded me with Besame Mucho in front of 200. Margaret smiled politely. That sounds like a beautiful wedding. I hope it was a happy day for the couple. It was the happiest day of my life, Robert whispered. Ellen felt tears forming in her eyes. Robert, how do you do this? How do you love someone who doesn't remember you? Robert looked at Ellen, then back at Margaret. Because love isn't about being remembered. Love is about choosing to love, even when the person you love can't choose you back. But doesn't it hurt? Ellen asked. Every single day, Robert admitted. Every morning, I wake up, hoping this will be the day she remembers me. And every morning, I introduce myself to my own wife. Margaret listened to this exchange with growing concern. Are you sad because of me? I don't want anyone to be sad because of me. Robert reached out and gently took Margaret's hand. I'm not sad because of you, Margaret. I'm sad because I miss you. But I'm not sad about loving you. Ellen made a decision that felt risky but necessary. Margaret, would you like to hear some music? Something that might feel familiar? I like music, Margaret said. Music feels safe. Ellen signaled to her production team. Soft guitar music began to play through the studio speakers. The opening notes of Besame Mucho. Margaret's head tilted slightly, like a bird hearing a distant sound. Her fingers began to move slightly, as if remembering how to sing. This is pretty, she said. It feels familiar. Robert began to sing softly, his voice carrying the melody that had defined their courtship, their wedding, their life together. Besame mucho, como si fuera esta noche la última vez. Margaret's eyes widened. Something was stirring in the depths of her damaged mind, some recognition that went beyond memory into the realm of soul. I know this song, she said, her voice filled with wonder. Yes, you do, Robert said, still singing. Margaret began to hum along, her voice tentative but true. The melody seemed to bypass her broken memory and connect directly to something deeper. You have a beautiful voice, Margaret told Robert. Have I heard you sing before? Every day for 45 years, Robert replied. Ellen watched in amazement as music accomplished what words and explanations couldn't. Margaret's entire demeanor was changing, softening, becoming more present. The song continued, and Margaret's humming grew stronger. Her eyes never left Robert's face, and something was happening behind them. Not full recognition, but connection. As the final notes played, Margaret looked at Robert with an expression Ellen had never seen before on her face during the interview. Not recognition exactly, but something warmer than polite interest. Robert, she said his name like she was testing how it felt in her mouth. Yes, Margaret. I don't remember you, she said honestly. But I feel like I should. I feel like you're important. Robert's tears were flowing freely now. You are important too, Margaret. You're the most important person in my life. Margaret studied his face carefully. Do I make you happy, Robert? Every single day, he replied. Even though I don't remember, especially because you don't remember. Because it means I get to fall in love with you all over again every day. Margaret considered this with the careful attention she gave to everything. Now, That sounds like a gift. It is a gift, Robert said. The most painful, beautiful gift I've ever received. Ellen realized she needed to ask the question that had been building throughout this entire exchange. Margaret, knowing what you know now, how do you feel about Robert? Margaret looked at Robert with an expression of wonder. I feel like he must be very special if he loves someone like me. Someone who can't remember. She paused, searching for words. I feel like I would like to know him better. Even if I can't remember him, I would like to try to love him. Robert's sob filled the studio. Ellen's tears were flowing freely now. Even the camera operators were wiping their eyes. Robert, Ellen said, Margaret wants to try to love you. How does that make you feel? Like the luckiest man in the world, Robert replied. Because most people only get to fall in love once. I get to fall in love with the same wonderful woman every single day. Ellen stood up and walked to where they were sitting. I want to tell you both something. What I've witnessed here today isn't just love. It's the most profound demonstration of commitment I've ever seen. She turned to address the audience. Robert teaches us that love isn't about what we remember. It's about what we choose. Every day, he chooses to love a woman who can't remember his name. That's not tragedy. That's heroism. Ellen looked back at Margaret and Robert. And Margaret, even though you can't remember your love story, you're still living it. Because real love transcends memory. Margaret was still looking at Robert with that expression of gentle wonder. Robert, would you like to dance with me? I don't remember if we've danced before, but I feel like we should dance. Robert's face lit up with joy. I would love to dance with you, Margaret. Ellen helped them both stand. The music began again. Besame Mucho played softly as Margaret awkwardly took Robert in her arms. They swayed together on the stage, not the practiced dancers they'd once been, but two people choosing connection despite everything that separated them. You feel familiar, Margaret whispered to Robert as they danced. You feel like home, Robert whispered back. Ellen watched them dance and realized she was witnessing something sacred. Not the love story she'd planned to tell, but something much more powerful, a demonstration that love is a choice, not a memory. The audience rose to their feet, not in applause but in reverence for what they were seeing. The cameras captured every moment, knowing they were documenting something extraordinary. When the dance ended, Margaret looked at Robert with something approaching recognition. My handsome Robert, she said softly. Yes, Margaret, I'm your Robert. Will you stay with me today? Even if I forget you again tomorrow? I'll stay with you every day for the rest of our lives, Robert promised. Ellen knew this was how the segment needed to end. Not with promises of recovered memory or medical miracles, but with the simple choice to love in spite of everything. Ladies and gentlemen, Ellen said to the audience, this is what love looks like when everything else is stripped away. This is love in its purest form. The episode aired 2 weeks later and became one of the most watched in Ellen's show history. Viewers wrote thousands of letters about their own experiences with Alzheimer's, about choosing love when love seemed impossible. Robert and Margaret went home together, and the next morning, Margaret woke up, not remembering the Ellen show, or the dance, or the song, but Robert introduced himself with the same patience he'd shown for 3 years. Hello, Margaret. I'm Robert. I love you. Hello, Robert, Margaret replied. You seem very kind. I think I would like to get to know you. And every morning after that, for the remainder of Margaret's life, Robert chose love over memory, presence over past, hope over heartbreak. Ellen kept a photo from that day in her dressing room. Margaret and Robert dancing on her stage, their faces peaceful despite everything they'd lost and everything they faced. Because sometimes the most important stories aren't about love that conquers all. Sometimes they're about love that endures all. Love that chooses to remain when remembering becomes impossible. Love that proves the heart knows things the mind has forgotten. The most beautiful love stories aren't always about happily ever after. Sometimes they're about choosing happiness every single day, even when yesterday disappears and tomorrow remains uncertain. Robert Martinez taught Ellen's audience, that love isn't about being remembered. Love is about choosing to remember for someone else, choosing to carry their story when they no longer can, choosing to dance even when the music has to be played again and again because the dance itself has been forgotten. In the end, Margaret's Alzheimer's didn't destroy their love story. It revealed its true strength, not built on shared memories, but on daily choices, not dependent on recognition, but sustained by recognition's more powerful sister, devotion.